Good evening, everyone. I'm Rose Krasnow, Deputy Director of the Planning Department, and I'm pleased to welcome you tonight to the second speaking event of our 90th anniversary Winter Speaker Series, in which we're celebrating not just the past history of the Planning Department, which has been long and distinguished, but also the future and how we have taken what occurred before, and we're building on it, and we think are moving in really good directions. And I'm sure that some of you showed up tonight to hear Joe Forkin, who was coming down from the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation. But lo and behold, he called us at 11:15 this morning and told us that he could not be here, that he had to testify at a hearing, and that there was no one he could send in his place. So we asked him to please send us his PowerPoint, which I'm going to present first before we have our other speakers tonight. Obviously, I can't give you nearly the history that he could, but I'll explain in a minute why I agreed to be his stand-in. But I did want to mention that we have our planning director, Gwen, right here. And we will have, after I present Joe's presentation, we'll hear from Rachel Newhouse, and then we'll also hear from John Henderson, who is with the Prince George's planning side, and there will be an opportunity for questions and answers afterwards. So the reason I said I would try and stand in for Joe Forkin is because my daughter lives in Philadelphia, and I have been just extraordinarily impressed with what that city has done in terms of taking old, dilapidated, urban areas and turning them into something incredibly exciting, very people involved, and just leading to a whole new type of urban recreation, in my opinion. So I'll go through the slides, and I'll talk as much as I know about them. The Delaware River Waterfront Corporation is a 501c3. Of course, the one thing we have working against us here in Montgomery County is that we don't happen to have a river. Except down on the Potomac, we have a small part where we can take advantage of it. Obviously, the river is very advantageous for them, but I still think that some of the concepts that they've employed really should work just as well here as we look at sites that we might be able to adapt for these type of recreational purposes. But the Delaware River Water Corporation acts as the steward of the waterfront to provide a benefit for all the citizens and visitors of the city. And their purpose is to design, develop, and manage the waterfront, basically for a 6.5-mile area. And what they try to do is to make it a vibrant destination location for recreation, cultural, and commercial activities for the residents and visitors of Philadelphia. And they've been trying to serve as the catalyst for high-quality investment in parks, trails, residential, retail, hotel, and other improvements. So they really do extend just beyond their recreational purposes. This is their waterfront area in Philadelphia. It's about 6.5 miles long. As I was just saying, they do try very hard to build these high-quality public parks, open space, and other public amenities. And one of the things they have really focused on, as you'll see as we look at some of the slides, is also connectivity, how to get people from some of these urban neighborhoods to these areas along the river and really heighten people's awareness of the amenities that they really have right next door to them. And they have been building, they've been doing more and more new events. We'll see some slides later from the Spruce Street Harbor Park, which is one that I'm very familiar with. So the last slide, actually, I believe is the Ray Street Pier. And that was, the original Ray Street Pier was constructed in 1896. And it had been used for shipping and had really fallen into complete disrepair. And it was primarily populated with weeds. It was the first project undertaken under the new master plan, which is what they've been operating under. And they teach yoga on it. They really have just a wide variety of activities that go on it. It was a major effort to bring this, what had been a very weedy site, really now is always used. I've been to one of the yoga classes on it. And I should add that they have some wonderful YouTube videos of all these different projects that they've done. We almost showed that one here tonight, and I think that we'll be sending out a list of the YouTube videos that you can all watch to get a better idea of some of these projects. This is the Washington Avenue Pier, which was completed in 2014. The staircase that you see was a work of art that was commissioned, and the artist called it a people buoy. And the idea was it would be like a ship's mast, and you could go up and you could literally see the boats coming in and out. You could look inward toward the city and see the people. It's been a very big draw. Pier 68, as you can see, they've just taken these abandoned spaces and turned them into open spaces for people to come and gather. This is a section of their Delaware River Trail, which they continue to extend further into the city. The Race Street Connector, like I said, they're trying to bring people to their different facilities. And so they've put public art here along this connector. The Spring Garden Connector. The Spring Garden District is quite well known, and they identified it as a key neighborhood connection to connect the burgeoning Northern Liberty section of Philadelphia to the Callow Hill, Fairmont, and the Schuylkill River Trail. And the site transforms the I-95 underpass by bringing in streetscaping, new sidewalks, and public art. You can see the public art right there. And the idea was to provide safe and welcoming access to the waterfront, and then to serve as a catalyst for private development. And then these are just a group of pictures that show some of the programming that they're now able to do on these different sites and piers. Something always seems to be going on there. The Spruce Street Harbor Park is one that when they first opened it, I think it was in 2014, they scheduled it to be open for 90 days. And they put hammocks in the trees, I mean lots of hammocks, and they have hanging LED lights. So if you're there in the day, they have all sorts of food trucks that come in. And if you're there at the night, all the LED lights are on, and it really shines like a Christmas tree. It's really quite beautiful. And when it was time for them to close after that 90 days, there was such a protest that they actually extended through the end of October. And now they continue to expand on the activities and the vendors that are already there. I was really amused the last time I was there. They now have a peanut butter and jelly food truck, which I have not seen anywhere else. And the kids, I was talking to a couple of kids that were in one of the hammocks, and they just thought that was the coolest thing, that they could go to a peanut butter and jelly food truck. And so it's really a very impressive site. And these are just pictures. You can see some of the food vendors there in the back. People in the hammocks. They're great hammocks, and you can, depending on size, you can fit a lot of people in a single hammock. And then at their Blue Cross River Rink Winterfest, again, this is just another site along the river where in the wintertime, they've obviously put up a very large ice rink. They have a big festival there with fireworks, etc. And you can just see it doesn't show all the people who have gathered for the festival. And then in the summer, they turn it into a roller skating rink, which I thought was a clever use of the same facility. And they've put miniature golf facilities in that same skating rink area. And this is a project that they're just starting to undertake, which is the municipal pier. And it's not in very great condition, but as you'll see from these next slides, that's what it looks like now. Not too exciting. This is what they hope to turn it into. They hope to turn it into a market and a gathering place. But given their track record on these other projects, there's every reason to believe that they'll be able to succeed in this one. And what I also wanted to mention was it's not just the Delaware River Waterfront Commission that's doing so much work to enliven the urban downtown parts of Philadelphia. The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society does a series of pop-up beer gardens, which I also had the pleasure of going to. They raise money for their horticultural efforts by finding, again, it's privately owned space, but it basically is unused, and they talk to the property owners, and they ask if they can set up these pop-up beer gardens. They put in some chairs and some pop-up tents, and you pay a fee to get in, and then you order your beer. And it's, again, they do it all summer long, and they're very, very, very successful. And so what we're trying to show here is that we really do work hard to think of new ways to provide ways for people to socialize, particularly as we all get more involved with our cell phones and our computers. It gets harder and harder to figure out ways to get people to really spend time with one another. And so now we're going to hear from two of our own parks and planning people. Rachel, are you going first? Okay. So I'm going to introduce both of them, and then I'm going to turn this program over to them. Rachel Newhouse is a landscape architect and planner coordinator with the Montgomery County Department of Parks. She joined the agency in 1988 and has planned and designed successful recreational, historic, and urban spaces, working on the Maryland Soccerplex in South Germantown and the Josiah Henson Special Park in North Bethesda. This evening, she is going to present the department's new Energized Public Spaces Initiative. This master plan aims to provide more green and open spaces in densely populated areas of the county, similar to what you just saw going on in Philadelphia. One of its goals is to quickly identify the needs and solutions for new urban parks and dedicate funding to acquire and develop the parks. And after we hear from Rachel, we will hear from John Henderson, who is the Research and Evaluation Manager at the Prince George's County Departments of Parks and Recreation. He's a certified Parks and Recreation executive, an attorney, a city planner, a public participation practitioner, and a mediator. He and Rachel have actually been working on some innovative ways to activate spaces and look at recreational trends so that we can determine new ways to go. And they're both going to present to you tonight. So please join me in welcoming Rachel Newhouse.
Which one do I push? Okay. Good evening. It's interesting. I love the presentation, the Philadelphia presentation. I bet they have no problem considering themselves an urban area, which is slightly different from Montgomery County. I'm going to start off with, since it is our 90th birthday, a little history of how our park system has developed. And you'll see that it's different. It's not a big city type thing. It's a different type of area. And that's why there has been some growing pains, I would say, to get to thinking of our urban areas. So just a quick, brief history. Oh, here we go. Okay, so 1927, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission is established. The gentleman on the bottom, E. Brooke Lee, had introduced the legislation that established the commission, and he was very concerned about what he was seeing as far as he knew the growth and development in D.C., and he wanted to make sure that there was a very thoughtful process of development as it occurred into both the Prince George's and Montgomery County. He wanted people to really be thinking about it. So above is a group of gentlemen. It's the first planning board. They looked at both Prince George's and Montgomery counties. And these gentlemen were generally businessmen who also were very concerned about the future development of the counties, that they were quality developments. There they are. And they actually, their first meetings were held in a law office in the county. And they're all men, yes. Okay, so then the commission started, so now they have to have a plan, right? How is this county going to develop? So the very top map, I know it's hard to see, it's a scanned, very old map, but it's the general development plan that was created for Montgomery County by two gentlemen. One gentleman, Roland Rogers, who was a landscape architect, and the other gentleman, Irvin Root, who was both an urban planner and an engineer. I'm saying that because our park director is an engineer. And those two gentlemen had a very innovative, at the time, and creative idea about how Montgomery County could grow. And basically, what they said is, let's do first, protect the lands around the stream valleys that exist in Montgomery County. Protect them because, number one, we want to protect our water sources. And number two, this will leave these beautiful green open spaces that are like a network throughout the whole county. You can sort of see the green above. And the second very innovative idea that they came up with was the idea of parkways through these areas, so that people from D.C., when they were coming out into the rural Montgomery County, way out there, they would drive along these scenic parkways and say, wow, this is so beautiful. This is where I want to live. And the developers would want to develop in and around these scenic parkways. So there's a picture of Roland Rogers, circled. And here is Rock Creek Parkway, one of the ideas that was laid out in their original thinking. And here, this is a plan that shows how the land developers were thinking as well. They were laying out their subdivisions right adjacent to, like in this case, Rock Creek Park. So this really established sort of how the county started redeveloping and how the parklands around the streams were being protected. I don't know why that. Okay, so in the 1930s and 1940s, that's what was focused on as far as park acquisition. The big thing that helped with park acquisition in Montgomery County was the Capper-Crampton Act, which was a federal act that dedicated funds towards acquiring stream valley parks. So that is what enabled the Park and Planning Commission to start acquiring these stream valleys. And basically, it happened in the lower part of the county that's circled there. This is just an interesting piece of history that was also happening in the 1940s. There was a woman who was a very famous tennis player, Pauline Betts Addy, right? And you know, I was like, why didn't I know about her? My family, we would watch, you know, tennis all the time. We knew all about, you know, the famous tennis player. But tennis had not been put onto television yet. So you only really knew tennis if you were in the inner circles. But she was very famous. She won Wimbledon. She was on the cover of Time. And then as far as it relates to our park history, she ended up marrying a Washington Post sports writer, Addie, and moved into Montgomery County and spent the last 40 years of her life teaching tennis at Sidwell Friends and then eventually at the Cabin John tennis center there, which has now been renamed for her. So I just thought that would be something interesting to throw in. Okay, so we have the 1950s to the 1960s, huge growth. I mean, the growth of Montgomery County was 300%. It went from about 80,000 people to over 350,000 people. Everybody was moving into the suburbs. There was a GI Bill that allowed people to get very cheap mortgages. So you can see that that's at the Silver Spring train station. You've got all kinds of people. You've got military people. They're flooding into the county. The developers were building, these were the high-quality homes. You wanted to be in the Chevy Chase area, to be in the most nice area, and next to the Rock Creek Park, because those were where people wanted to be. But there was also affordable housing being built. This is the Falklands, which is in Silver Spring. And this is how Wheaton was built out. You can see before and after. Before, there's that little triangle area with a couple businesses, and after, you just see the spread of single-family houses. So there was a lot going on in the county then as far as suburban development. At that same time, let's see, I think it skipped one. During that same time, the Park and Planning Commission started to think, well, we focused on Stream Valley parks, maybe we should now think about larger parks. So the idea of establishing regional parks was proposed. And the first 4 regional parks were the Cabin John, the Rock Creek Regional Park, Northwest Regional Park, and Wheaton Regional Park. And here's some pictures of Wheaton Regional Park. And these really established, the recreational centers that people could go to. The Stream Valley parks had a little bit of recreation in them, but these started having the garden areas, the train areas, the big playgrounds, the group picnic areas. So this is what was providing people with a way to get outside and recreate. Then in the 1960s, we have Rachel Carson. She was a resident of Silver Spring. She brought the awareness of, the pesticides and how to protect the environment. And what that did was everybody started thinking about the natural environment, talking about environmental education. And for the Parks Department, for us, we started to look even more into how to provide environmental education through nature centers and things like that. And it also, there were federal funds that allowed the Park and Planning Commission to buy, like the Conservation Park. This is Blockhouse Conservation Park. And the program open space funds were introduced at this time. So again, funding to help us build our park system. And funding used for Little Bennett Regional Park, which is also, at this time. So then we have the 1970s. We've got sort of the commercial areas that are building up. We've got our Montgomery Regional Office building up in the upper left. We've got Wisconsin Avenue, and then down below we've got Silver Spring. So businesses were booming and coming to this area, and we had to think about parks and how to provide parks sort of adjacent to those public areas of, high density, high commercial development. So this was one of our first ones. It's Elm Street Urban Park. The other urban park that was put in the 1970s is Woodside, which is that way. Where am I? Yeah, right across from this building. So those were two of some of our first urban parks. Then in the 1980s, there was a very innovative program that the planning department came up with, and it was the Agricultural Preserve. And the idea here was to preserve all the rural lands and the outer edge of Montgomery County so that the farming industry and the farmlands would not be lost to all this development. There was a ton of development coming into Montgomery County, and the thought was, how are we going to preserve these lands? And they did so by basically giving a transfer development rights, so people who had big farms could transfer their development rights from their farms to development receiving areas that were identified basically on the corridors and on major transportation routes, so that they could preserve their farm yet still get development money from it. So it was very, very innovative. And I believe that was one of the brainchildren of Royce Hansen, who was one of our commissioners. In the 1990s, we have, okay, so the agricultural preserve is preserved, but we still have all kinds of pressure for development. And the pressure was coming up and down the 270 corridor. And we, as a Parks Department, started saying, okay, well, we don't have enough money to buy all the land that we can get out here. How can we start working with these developers? And the developers were working on large tracts of land. So we were able to basically get developers, okay, this is the area that was growing, to start providing parks to us. And this is a map, I would say basically starting in the 1990s through about 2010, all the development that was coming into, this is Clarksburg, we were able to work with developers to not only dedicate the lands needed for parks, but in many cases to build them. And these are just 3 examples. 2001, another brilliant idea from our planning department and council was the Legacy Open Space Functional Master Plan. And what that did was that provided another set of funding mechanisms to identify the best lands in the county in these the best, and it was an economic driving force too, to say, okay, if we preserve these areas, how do we continue to make Montgomery County the place where people want to live and work and be? And you'll see that Legacy Open Space covers many categories. Natural resource lands can be preserved, the water supply lands, again, sort of continuing on the original idea, the heritage resources, trail connections and greenways, farmland and open space, and finally urban open spaces can all be identified as legacy open space projects. So then we get into the 2012 era. And this is what I mean about thinking differently about the growth of our parks. So our parks have been growing along stream valleys. Now we're preserving farmland, and we're, protecting our water sources and, doing all that kind of good stuff. But we're looking around and we're noticing that people still want to move into Montgomery County. And the county was rezoning, doing a zoning code rewrite to allow more housing development into the business areas. So as park planners, we said, what is going on now? Well, our existing urban parks are all on the edges of these central development or central business districts. They were put there to buffer people from all the high density. And all of a sudden we're like, well, wait, now people are going to be living in that high density. It's not just going to be people going to work there and going home. People are living there. So what are we going to do? So we started looking at areas where they were doing new park redevelopment in these growing cities. We looked at Detroit. We were like, okay, what are they doing there? Well, how are they renovating their parks? And this was one that really we fell in love with because it's a pretty small park. This is about 1.5 acres, and yet so much is happening there. There's all kinds of events, there's lawns, there's food, there's a stage that goes up and down out of the ground, and it also is a fountain, and So it was a very highly active area. And we were like, oh, well, that's what they're doing. And they're also, the picture on the right shows a donor wall. So they're getting, people to donate to them and help build these really fascinating, interesting, active areas. Another place we studied was in Houston. This was a park called Discovery Green that basically got created out of nothing, a surface parking lot. And that was a really new idea. And if you'll notice, next to the park, you'll see the high residential buildings going up. This is their front yard now. This is where these people are going to be. And this is another very highly successful area. They brought in those trees at that size. I mean, those trees did not exist. The pictures of the cranes bringing in the trees. And the cool thing that we learned about this park was that pretty much every garden, every tree, every element to the park, had someone's name on it. So someone had donated a piece of what made that park. So the light bulbs are starting to go off in our heads. We're like, oh, that's a pretty cool new way about, how to do things. We also look close to home, and we were noticing that a lot of the really active, energized spaces were not necessarily parks. I mean, this is Rockville Town Center. That's just a nice green area adjacent to all this retail, but people like to be there. And we're like, oh, well, why do they want to be there? What's there? What is bringing people to this area? They had programming. They had the food next door. So here's another one, Veterans Park in Bethesda. That's not a park. That's actually a DOT right-of-way that's been dedicated to this just plaza area. There's people in it all the time. It's, again, I think the adjacent retail with the food really helps with this, but there's a fountain. It's a centrally located place. So, we're like, oh, that's very popular too. And then, of course, we have the Silver Spring Fountain. Always active. It's just something that people want to be at, they want to be doing. So we studied these things and said, those are some things that we can consider doing in our parks, right? And the other thing that was going on is the county was also looking at the nighttime economy. What Montgomery County officials were realizing was that Montgomery County kind of went to sleep at like 6 p.m., maybe 8 p.m. There wasn't a whole lot to do, and everyone was rushing down to D.C. where it was cool and fun and active. And so we sat on a task force and we said, well, what as far as what can the public spaces be like to be interesting and innovative? So lighting. I know that you talked a little bit about lighting. We were talking about lighting festivals tonight, but lighting is very, very important. I mean, to tell you the truth, our parks, most of them right now, close at dark. So this is a whole new thing that we are having to start to think about. Yeah, we should be lighting. We should be adding all this interesting stuff to the areas that we want to attract activity and attract people. I mean, just look at how cool that stuff is. And people feel safe and they want to be out walking around in that. Some of the other things that are happening in spaces, some in parks, some in just public spaces, are programming and the spray grounds and the interesting art that you stand underneath and take your, everybody has a picture of themselves with that bean. So, there's these pop-up sort of carnival places that are making the place interesting. We actually have done this. I'm like, yay. Where you have these just outdoor movie events, and you can buy those movie screens. They're blow up. You blow them up. You can put them anywhere. Of course, we have the ice skating rinks. Again, more, just pop-up interesting amenities and activities to just bring people into these spaces. And the food trucks. And that's another thing that Montgomery County has really thought a lot about is what does it take to, encourage food trucks to come to your area and to maybe not make it so hard to get a permit. So again, we're all thinking about this stuff. And interesting amenities, of course. And last, next to food. If you can't have your space next to food, bring the food truck. And that will help. So we'll step back here a little bit. So in Montgomery County, we're like, okay, well, what do we have to do to now have spaces like this? Well, the first thing we had to do was actually create new classifications of urban parks. Like I said before, we had urban buffer parks. That's the only type of urban park we even understood, was outside of these central business districts. Now we have civic greens where we say people can gather. We have countywide urban recreational parks that are urban. We have urban greenways. So we defined a number of different types of spaces that could happen in Montgomery County so that we could then say, oh, this should be a civic green. We also, we kept the urban buffer park because that's very valuable, and we have a number of them, and we still use them. And we talked about neighborhood greens, again, in these dense urbanizing areas. And we even looked at very small community use urban parks that could be, we looked at what was happening in some of the bigger cities, and they have like a basketball court is a park. And people are using it all the time. So we wanted to have the opportunity to be able to look for those types of spaces. And when we finally got them approved through the county council, we then started applying them to all the sector plans that we were looking at throughout the county. So you can see the sector plans in the urban areas. We're finishing up with a couple at county council right now. One in Bethesda where we've proposed 13 new parks. We've got 3 civic greens. We've got, a number of new neighborhood green urban parks. We've got the urban greenways. So the classifications allowed us to then look at these areas and say, what is needed? What is the type of system that is needed in these urban areas? And then in 2016, we started with some activation programs. So for some of our existing urban parks, they were pretty typical urban parks, very green, which we're very proud about, with maybe a playground and maybe some seating areas. So not a lot of programming happening in them. So we said, well, how about if we start with these activation programs? And so the mission is to get more people into the parks, just to get people out and exploring their parks and into them. And we now have staff dedicated to creating events or working with partners to create events. We've got the dancers. There actually was a Bali dancing program in Elm Street Urban Park. We now have a climbing wall that we take out to our parks and get people on it and using it. We have our park, the guys who climb the trees. What are their names? Arborists. Yeah, they our tree climbers do this thing where they actually go out and they teach children and adults how to climb trees. They put them in harnesses and they get them up there. And remember, we used to climb trees. That was something pretty typical when I was growing up. Now it's like, no, don't climb that tree. Don't climb that tree. Well, so now we are saying, get on up into that tree, but safely. And another program that we just started is a park prescription program. It's a new national program that's with the National Park and Recreation Association. It really reminds us how important it is to get out into nature for our health. It's a reminder because I don't think we think about it that much. If we don't feel good, we might say, oh, I'll go to the doctor. We don't think about, oh, I'm going to go out and get some fresh air, and that'll make me feel good. So it's sort of a reminder to people to be outside, enjoy the activities that are out there. And there's a ton of research that just shows the health benefits of being in a park. like the people who live within a half-mile green space, have a lower incidence of diseases. There's something called forest bathing that actually is prescribed in other countries, where doctors do say, go out and lay down in a forest and you are going to feel good. The exercising outside, this is something that the research also shows that when you do exercise outside, you exercise for a longer amount of time. And then there's the attention deficit theory. By being in nature increases your focus, decreases obsessive thinking, clears the way for creativity. There's a number of people who now do these things called walking meetings. We've done them in our office, where you, instead of sitting and talking, you actually get out and you walk and talk with your group. And we have noticed that we feel more creative. We're thinking better when we do that. So it worked for us. And this is funny. Nature makes you nicer. So maybe when you have to have that very stressful talk with that employee who's not doing that well, you go outside in nature and sit down at a picnic table, and maybe it's a little bit better conversation. So you're stressed out and tired. What would you do to feel better? Go on a walk through a park, or lie down in a comfy chair. Hopefully you all pick number 2, because that's what's going to work. And then this is just a little video talking about sort of the marketing problems that nature has.
Do you find yourself longing for the apocalypse? I did. I was looking for a reason to live. Hi. Are you feeling tired, irritable, stressed out? Well, you might consider nature.
From the people that brought you Getting Outside comes prescription strength Nature, a non-harmful medication shown to relieve the crippling symptoms of modern life.
Nature's recommended for humans of all ages, and it's great for pets too.
Nature can reduce cynicism, meaninglessness, anal retentiveness, and murderous rage. In clinical studies, Nature is proven to decrease work-induced catatonia.
Caution. Nature may cause you to slow down, quit your job, or seriously consider what the you're doing with your life.
If you are overly cynical, jaded, or emotionally numb, you may need to increase your dose of Nature. Do you have trouble being even mildly uncomfortable? Nature may not be right for you. Side effects may include spontaneous euphoria, taking yourself less seriously, and being in a good mood for no apparent reason.
So ask your doctor if nature is right for you.
So we have this park prescription program in Montgomery County, Maryland. We have teamed up with a doctor who's actually started this program down in D.C. His name is Dr. Robert Czar. And he is helping us with developing our website and linking doctors from their electronic medical record. All of our doctors now walk in and they've got everything on their iPad and they can say, oh, it looks like you haven't been here in 5 years. Whatever it is, they can now actually hit a website and find out if there's a park nearby where you live and say, you are kind of stressed out. Have you considered going to this park? Or you've mentioned that you really would like to lose some weight. Well, this park has a walking trail. So the doctor is actually there looking at what's nearby you and saying, why don't you consider doing this? And so we think this is a very nice program to be working on. There are actually some doctors in Montgomery County who have prescribed our parks, I learned recently. And this is just a real quick, Dr. Czar just talking about, the program a little bit.
We are now very much a sedentary culture. We have changed from an active culture of being outside, of playing outside, to now being inside.
49% of American adults do not engage in the Surgeon General's recommendations of 30 minutes of physical activity each day.
They're not moving is the problem, and they're spending a lot of time looking at a virtual world.
You know, every generation for the last 3 to 4 has had higher disease rates, and now we're the first generation, our kids are going to be the first to die before their parents if we follow current trends.
DC Park RX, or DC Park Prescription, is part of a larger initiative around the country to get people to be outside, to go outside, to visit a park. It's special in that our focus with Park RX is for doctors and other healthcare providers to actually prescribe nature.
So our national parks are a great place to go to be able to combine both the opportunities to be able to be outdoors and to breathe the fresh air and to be active, but as well to be able to learn something. Our national parks always have a story to tell.
Every city, every county, every part of the country has parks, and all of these people would benefit from spending more time outside.
You know, in 20 years of medicine, I've come to this conclusion: medical offices are for medical things. You go there when you're sick, but health occurs in the medical home's backyard. That could be in your backyard, that could be a national park, but someplace that you're outside, moving and playing.
So with that, I'll turn it over to John Henderson, who's going to talk a little bit about the trends that we're seeing in recreation and what we're trying to do with some of the new trending ideas. Thanks. And then I'm going to come back and finish up with energized urban spaces, public spaces.
Thanks, Rachel. Happy to be here. Yeah, Rachel called me early this morning with panicked to try and fill in some time. So luckily, I was working on a project that I was going to present next week on trends, and so hopefully you'll find it interesting. And so you're the kind of the test audience for this. So does anyone recall what this is? Are you old enough to know? You know, the pet rock. So what is the difference between a trend and a fad? Obviously, you know, a fad is something that is just temporary, in vogue, it's trendy. Whereas a trend, you know, sets a new course or direction. It has lasting impact. It can often be a driver of change, and sometimes in a very disruptive way. I think we're all experiencing, you know, AirNib. We've got Uber, you know, digital photography, which was disruptive in its time. So a lot of these things that have come and are coming will be very disruptive to the way, you know, we do business. This was put together for our programming staff in Prince George's County. The Prince George's Parks and Recreation probably does more recreation programming than any other local park agency in the nation. You know, about 12,000 programs a year. A big portion of the budget goes to recreation programming. But only 36% of the population actually avails themselves of that and takes advantage of it. That's pretty standard, I think, across the country. You know, I've looked at some benchmarking on this, but you know, we're going to be experiencing a lot of competition as Prince George's County develops out. You know, a lot of competition from churches, from schools, private sector, just a lot of competition. And in order to maintain our market share, you know, we have to do a lot to maintain the quality of what we provide. So for this, I kind of organized the material into these four circles, you know, dealing with placemaking, technology, demography, and just management strategies. So the placemaking is kind of the where and when, and the technology is how, and the demography is who, and then, you know, as all those things intersect and disrupt, our way of doing business, what kind of management strategies do we need to put in place to deal with those? So in placemaking, this is not a comprehensive list by any means, but things that just came to my mind that we're going to have to deal with. Urbanization, and especially and I'm old enough, when I was in planning school, I mean, the fact that we have this back to the city movement and youth, flocking to the cities was, really hard to imagine. I live in D.C. in the Columbia Heights neighborhood, and I would say that anytime I go to a local restaurant or whatever, I'm probably the oldest person in the restaurant. I'm usually the only person reading a physical newspaper, and I'm the only one who pays with cash. So it's kind of like, it kind of shows how fast things are moving. Tactical urbanism. Go back here. Tactical urbanism is kind of like the laboratory for testing things in real time. Where short-term action, things that are low cost, can really be demonstrative. I think a lot of us have experienced public meetings where you're trying to introduce something that will change the physical environment, and people, there's usually a good proportion that, not in my backyard, we're not going to do that, the naysayers. And so I think the right time and place, these pop-up opportunities kind of show how people can actually experience the change before there's a lot of investment in it, and possibly garner wider support for the change. Increased competition, I mentioned that in Prince George's, homeschooling, faith-based recreation, the shift from local leagues, you used to have a lot of little league play and whatever, and now there's great interest in what they call travel ball, where parents think that having this, the ability to go around to various jurisdictions actually provides a richer experience and provides the youth with an advantage in getting into perhaps a better school or a better network of contacts that will really provide advantage later on in life. Climate change, of course, is kind of pervasive. We'll all be dealing with that, regardless of your view on how it's being caused. It is real. And nature deficit order, Rachel touched on that, and government mandates. We've got something going on, and I don't know how much it's affecting Montgomery County, but the vendor transition, we relied a lot on contractors to do a lot of the recreation programming, and the IRS said, no, when you're providing direction or providing training, those people should be called employees, and that they're entitled to all of these benefits. So it's really very, very disruptive to the way we've been operating and offering our programming. So a few quick examples, and Rachel touched on this, the pop-up. Pop-up, in this case, what you're doing in Montgomery County is a government directed program, affording opportunity, providing that element of surprise, allowing people to avail themselves of things that perhaps they would not otherwise experience. A lot of pop-ups can be citizen-driven. So you do have on the left side, New York City pop-up, a government-directed initiative that just kind of lays out an urban plaza in what was previously a thoroughfare, and allows people to experience exactly what this change would look like. And without that, with the consultants coming in with all of their boards and drawings and PowerPoints, perhaps people would not really have the ability to kind of embrace that kind of a change. On the upper right, that's in Montreal, something they call Le Projet de Boule Rose on St. Catherine Street, where they, now it's like a kilometer long, where they put up these pink balls on a string for to kind of like totally transform that part of St. Catherine Street in Montreal. Now it's become a yearly installation, and it grows bigger and bigger each year. And then the lower right is parklet. I think, I don't know whether there are many parklets in Montgomery County, but it started in San Francisco back in 2005 and has become a national movement. Every third Friday in September is the National Parking Day, and where parking spaces are taken over for a day, to create a temporary park space. Another example from Montreal, the back alleyways in Montreal. There was a deficit of park space, and so some architects decided that it would be innovative to just dig up the alley and plant the bushes and flowers, etc. Didn't catch on initially, but now it is a big thing in Montreal. Over 100 alleyways have been dug up and planted, and it's become a tourist attraction in Montreal. Probably one of the biggest pop-ups of all, the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. It was a 6-month event that really changed the course of city planning in the nation. Parkour. A gentleman who was a French physical educator, Georges Hébert. He was fascinated with the physical development of indigenous peoples and how they were able to move and their speed and dexterity. And so that inspired him to come up with this natural method that was adopted by the French military in training. And so, parkour, I didn't include a video on it, but it's, people, really jumping from, doing really, it's an extreme sport is what it is, and it's really fascinating to watch. It can be kind of a guerrilla element to it, where people kind of do this and kind of it can be disruptive and disturbing sometimes. Rachel covered this kind of the nature deficit order. Richard Louv is kind of the guru on this, and he kind of talks about the parental fears, the restricted access to natural areas, and the lure of the technology that's kind of keeping kids indoors and not experiencing nature, which he thinks is leading to a lot of the diseases that have become more prevalent in the media. These government mandates, I mentioned the one, this transition that we're going with the contractors. Another example is this home and community-based services under Medicaid, which in Prince George's County, we have an award-winning therapeutic recreation program. People actually move to Prince George's County to take a benefit of those outstanding services. But it involves quite often segregating people with mental or physical disabilities and providing them with specialized services. Sometimes in the nonprofit world, it's called sheltered workshops. All of that is being outlawed. The whole emphasis is to get people from being segregated with a provision of these special services, but integrating them into normal life. And so it's really going to have a profound change on the way we deliver that therapeutic recreation and inclusion services in Prince George's. So going to technology, things that I think virtual reality. I think we've all seen all of the the videos and the news reports, and probably even experienced putting these headsets on, and you can be really anywhere in the world. A lot of this is now happening in recreation, where you can have your headset programmed and on your bike and be interacting with a world-class expert on spinning, somewhere else in the world. And so you kind of wonder, well, why, if you can, at relatively low cost in your own basement, have that kind of experience, why would you want to, spend the money to go to a gym or even a public park and recreation center for a spinning class when you can do that in your own home? So it's really going to be transformative in order to maintain the quality and the interest to get people to come into our facilities. Let's say augmented reality. That's taking the real world environment, like with the Google Glass or whatever, where you get this supplemental information that's generated to provide additional sound, video, graphics, GPS data, things that can help people do their jobs better. Video surveillance and recognition, such as apps and drones, robotics, assisted technology, especially for those with disabilities, driverless vehicles, and instant communication, which can, in the recreation world, cell phone leagues, where instantaneously it seems like a whole field is mobbed with people. You think they just kind of came out of nowhere, and flash mobs. So some examples: assistive technology, lots of products and equipment and systems that will enhance learning, working, and daily living for persons with disabilities. Pokemon, have a little video, I think. Kind of the ultimate in augmented reality. And an example of driverless vehicles are just not automobiles and trucks. There's now a whole new component of like these personal vehicles that will follow you around, like this like suitcase that follows you around, and so you can put your go to the grocery store and it'll follow you around. There's a whole line of luggage with this technology as well. You don't need to drag your bag, it'll just follow you. Here's an example of a flash mob. This is from Riga, Latvia. So the next slide is actually a flash mob that I experienced in Baku, Azerbaijan. And if any of you are familiar with Azerbaijan, it's one of the most repressive dictatorships in the nation or in the world. And here this group of people just kind of like assembled, instantaneously did their little dance in front of the McDonald's and dispersed. And kind of like showing, kind of thumbing their nose at the regime in Azerbaijan. So going to demography, the things that I highlighted here in Prince George's, I mentioned our TR programs. There's a problem with aging out of those programs. They kind of go to the age 18, and now, in a lot of the public meetings, people want to know, what's next? How can we provide services to people as adults? Age-friendly communities, making sure that as we age, that we are able to experience all of the amenities in the urban areas. Sandwich generation, people living longer, they now have to consider worrying about their parents as well as their children. The dog as a full member of the family, and providing the appropriate amenities. Helicopter parenting, which has radically changed the way people use parks. Of course, the story about the parents that were arrested for allowing their children to walk to a park here in Montgomery County. Gender neutrality, a big change that is affecting the way programs are being delivered. And the largest concentration in the country of veterans and veteran families is here in Prince George's and Montgomery counties. So, gender neutrality has been a lot in the news, and not, providing age or gender-specific programming, and trying to deal with all the legal and regulatory aspects of that, and calming any fears in the public, and increasing understanding. It's a huge deal, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about that. As I said, this slide, I found an article that was just published, I think about a month ago, about how the dog is now viewed, as a full family member in many places, I think, around the world. The special needs of military veterans and military families, and all of the various mental and physical issues that those members of our society have to deal with. And last, the management strategies. I've highlighted moving to flexible, multi-generational facilities, creative placemaking, experience-based amenities, integrated public realm, open data, real-time data, and a focus on social capital. Experience-based amenities. A lot of interest now on very specialized recreation training facilities, and quite often these types of facilities don't need to be in a big, expensive gymnasium. You can have it in an office park. You can have it in a shopping center. These quite often don't need to take a lot of space, but they are in demand. And those entities that are able to provide those services, it can be quite lucrative as well. Sports complexes that I mentioned, the trend going from local leagues to travel ball, to have a sports complex that will provide the amenities to attract a tournament or league to play in your facility. That can also be quite lucrative. Obviously, it's very expensive to develop these types of facilities, but done in the right way and with very sensitive design and close look at the economics, it can be quite profitable as well. This is an example from Boston, this Boston Air project. This is a notice from the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. They're doing a project in conjunction with the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and they're inviting Boston artists to apply to become artists in residence in the agencies or departments in the city of Boston. So each those agencies that want to get paired up with an artist can do so with the recognition that having an artist in your midst can help change the way you think about things and kind of loosen things up and increase your ability to be more creative. According to what I've read about this, the police department actually is the one that has been most receptive to having these artists in residence. The SUFA bench, we have several of them in Prince George's County. It's a platform for that has, you can charge your cell phone with it, but it also has sensors built into it, so that if you're walking by and your cell phone is activated, it can pick up the signal and it'll record data, and so it's a way for people to understand how their park space is being used in real time and collecting this data. I think another thing about data is that with crowdsourcing, we have more data than we can possibly ever analyze, and the more that governmental data is made available, kind of open source, and made available to people, that allows those people who are interested in doing this analysis around the world, literally, that they can come up with creative ways of addressing some of the challenges that we'll be facing in the future. And then last, I wanted to address something called the Youth Program Quality Initiative. I mentioned that we offer these 12,000 programs in Prince George's County. A lot of them are things that have been rolled over for years and years and years. This Weichert Center and others, this Program Quality Initiative is from the Weichert Center, is a scientifically based way to gauge program quality, and it's an assessment tool where you can either do a self-assessment or you can have observers come in and observe the program, and they kind of rate the program, and the level of difficulty increases as you step up the pyramid, and with the highest level being youth engagement, where the youth actually work with the staff to help develop and shape the program that's being delivered, and it kind of provides this enhanced self-confidence among the youth, and it's a great learning tool, and I think that is definitely the future of recreation programming. And I think that was it. I think Rachel had her philosopher. I have Aristotle. The quality of life is determined by its activities. And I think a lot of these trends, I just touched the top of ones that occurred to me, but there's going to be a lot of change coming in a very short period of time, and we have to figure out ways to deal with it constructively. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much. So because we have to deal with all these changes in a short amount of time, and there's so many changes coming, we have our last, what I'm going to discuss is our latest public plan, which is the Energized Public Spaces Plan. So if you can go back to my presentation. Thank you. Yep, right there. So it's something we actually started a couple months ago, but we are in the formative phases of this right now, and we're doing it very, very quickly because, as John mentioned, things are changing fast and we got to keep up with them. So what is Energized Public Spaces? Energy being the people that will energize these spaces, and the public spaces is actually where it occurs. And I think what is notable about this plan that we as park planners are leading is that we're not just thinking about parks anymore. We're thinking about public space, public road right-of-ways, anything that could be available to bring people into the space and activate it. So it's a very different thing for us to be doing, but it's why it's so exciting. So like I said, we're considering all resources because the resources are getting fewer and fewer. The land is not growing, it's going away. So we're looking at how to partner with schools, how to partner with private developers, how to look at recreation facilities that can be more activated, just all of the various opportunities out there. And I wanted to show you what our study area is in Montgomery County. So basically, we have mapped the high-density residential areas and the high-density working areas where there's lots of workers. So those are the green spaces. So this is where we're looking at throughout the county, and our pilot area is Silver Spring. Silver Spring mainly because we don't see another master plan coming in many, many years. It's one of the fewer served spaces for parks, so there's a real need there. We're going to be looking at, again, seeing if we can add more classifications to our parks. I mean, maybe we add parklets as a way to identify spaces. So we're going to be looking at many ways to do that. We want people to have a balance of experiences, active, contemplative, and social for all the different aspects of health. And we're going to be using the GIS systems to look at where these places should occur. We're going to be able to map the areas of active recreation and see where there are a lot of them and where there aren't any of them. We're going to be able to map, of course, the density of the area. And with that, we'll be able to identify hot spots of where these public spaces should happen. We're on a very tight timeline. We're in the public input stage of this phase. So, and this public input, we're just talking about parks of the future. So you all that don't work in our department, we're looking for your input. We're looking for input on the park recreation and open space plan that we're doing, the Energized Public Spaces plan that we're doing, and the capital improvement project that we're doing. And this last video is just to remind us all the importance of involving the public and why the public is so valuable to us.
What I hear when I'm being yelled at is people caring loudly at me.
There is a disturbing lack of benches in Ramsey Park. I want to sit more.
I found a sandwich in one of your parks, and I want to know why it didn't have mayonnaise. What's so funny?
Oh.
What are you, some kind of moron? Why don't you have hand dryers in the park bathrooms? They're so much more sanitary than paper towels. Anyone knows that.
My bird is missing. I need a permit to post signs.
Let me just look for that form.
There's no time. He can fly.
I mean, where are my kids supposed to play? The rock quarry? There's rocks in there.
There's a sign at Ramsey Park that says, "Do not drink the sprinkler water," so I made sun tea with it, and now I have an infection. Sir? Sir, are you listening to me, sir? Sir, I'm talking to you. Sir, are you aware that there is waste in your water system?
We just got 4 of those desks at Parkside headquarters, and you know what you love about them is that the citizens are staying and they're exercising while they're complaining. So, thank you very much.
So I think you probably got a lot more than you thought you were going to get when you came in tonight. We again apologize that Mr. Forkin didn't make it, but I just found this presentation. I learned a lot, I can say. I realized that our park planners really have a very different job today than they had even 10 years ago. I think I was walking to a park in my neighborhood. This was several years ago, and there was a little kid near me, and I said to him, "You don't look very happy. What's wrong?" And he literally said, "My mom made me go outside." And it really struck a nerve, and I think we realized that the way we are providing recreation in parks has to change, but some of the trends we saw here from John I didn't know about. A little scary, but I kind of look forward to seeing what happens in the years ahead. And I wanted to just leave a few minutes for questions for either John or for Rachel. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir. Oh, wait, we'll bring a mic.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dalia. I actually come from Lebanon. I just arrived here in September, and I'm an environmentalist, and also I'm a person specialized in community-based management. And I found your presentation very interesting, so thank you for the great presentations. I just had some points that I would like to raise. Maybe you already consider them in your planning, but I thought it might be helpful to highlight because there were some stuff that also we face in our countries and whenever we worked with communities. In our country, unfortunately, we don't have the park system. However, we have protected areas and we have geoparks. So one of the big geoparks known there is the biosphere, the Shuf Cedars Biosphere Reserve. And we always plan to create different community-based activities to involve people. So I just want to highlight some issues that we were concerned about when we thought about engaging people in nature resources management and in any park system, which is the protected areas and others. First, there's the idea of planning and considering the community participation and their opinion. It's very important to assure that the communities are along the process all over, so involving them through surveys, community meetings, and others. Maybe you're already doing that, but I think this is very important. Also investigating community concerns in relation to the use of the public space and trying to undermine them. For example, I know in Silver Spring, whenever people ask me where do you live, I say in Silver Spring, they say, "Oh, that's not a safe place." So this is a major concern whenever you think about public spaces like safety. And here I think it's a major challenge to tackle it whenever you want to create something which people can just to undermine this major concern. Other thing is whenever you talk about urban parks, urban planning, it's about creating a vibrant place, a place full of life where people can think about anything, including expressing themselves freely. So the example that you gave about those people biking in front of in the street, I can imagine it done in a park, in an event, and people enjoying it instead of thinking about it as a nuisance. So parks are the right place to do such events and such activities. It's about promoting people to come to these places and creating different events or things for them to do that. Another thing is I want to highlight the importance of the public-private participation and its importance and on building on them. And you already gave several examples about how the private sector is supporting several parks in different places, and this is very important, I think, for you to invest into it, because I'm sure that the private sector here is concerned also about that, and it's a way to connect with them, because they are the local community, the local people here, the private sector and companies here. Also, I'm concerned about the objective of a park. What is the objective of creating a park? Is it just recreational, or is it natural, or is it health? So we have to highlight that in relation to each park that you are working on. So if it's about conserving biodiversity too, this is supposed to be highlighted more. We have to show it to people, to remind people about these benefits through maybe different recreational outdoor activities, outdoor education, some stuff which can be fun for people and they can enjoy too, and they can be reminded about these values for the park. Also, one more thing is about, I wanted to give an example from Lebanon, from that geopark. The nice thing, for example, we have every year a festival. They call it the Mountain Festival, and we have a theme for it, and it's about nature conservation, for example. So last year it's called Happy Birds Day, and it highlighted all the birds of the countries and their values, and had a different recreational activities in relation to this. One year we had the bees, and we brought all of these the protectors of beehives and bee makers, and it was very interactive, and people loved it. And even we brought food and cultural stuff related to food. So it wasn't typical nature, but it highlighted a theme that we wanted people to be concerned about. One last thing to be highlighted is that I think the value of the USA is in the cultural integrity. And I think this can be much highlighted in the parks too. So why don't these parks offer space for people to display their crafts and traditional knowledge of different culture? Or why they cannot be a space for doing a typical marketplace, the one that we have in Silver Spring? Why we don't do them there in these parks so that people can feel this connection and ownership? So it's always it's good to think outside the box whenever you want to think about public participation and people involvement. Sorry for being long, but I hope this was helpful.
Oh, that was amazing. I don't know if you want to respond. I don't know if you want a job. Because those were great ideas. I think you'll find as you learn more about our Montgomery County Parks system that we actually already do a lot of those things, but there were some you mentioned that I think we should definitely look into. Are there other questions?
I agree also. Very provocative presentations. Thank you. And my comment is kind of about Mr. Henderson's presentation. 3 points. One is, it's very interesting you were talking about the competition that the Parks Department has for programming. 36% of people consume, we'll say, your programming. But I wonder what the total percentage of people consuming active recreation programming is in your county. And I think the next generation of park planning is to actually take more responsibility for planning for park and recreation beyond the facilities the agency owns. So that, and that was partly talked about in the Energized Public Spaces presentation, but if people are participating in a church program, that's great. I mean, I'm not religious, but people are active. And there's parks and recreation professionals have the opportunity, if the agencies and the people over them can be convinced, to take a more active role in planning, engaging the private sector, including those facilities in the plans, which was a comment I made on the parks planning process in Montgomery County, which is ongoing now. You should ask the state for a delay, and you should incorporate those other facilities, even non-MNC PPC properties like the reservoirs, the state parks, Glen Echo, other facilities in the county. Anyway, the point about the youth engagement stuff, that actually pertains to everybody. That ladder, the classic ladder of citizen participation, the Sherry Arnstein article from 1968. I mean, but that method is about is fully pertainable to adults. And the one thing would have been interesting to have someone here too, would have been from Baltimore County, because Baltimore County, where I worked briefly, in the 70s, they riffed all their parks programmers because they didn't want to pay for them, but they devolved it to the citizens. And I think there are real gaps. They don't provide any capacity building for that civic engagement. They don't make up and provide money to the more impoverished areas. But the rich neighborhoods, they might raise $2 million to do their parks programming. The poor neighborhoods have $15,000 and they don't make up for it. But somehow with that Weichert stuff and that initiative, there are ways to integrate citizens in programming. And I was really intrigued by all the presentations and the points that are raised, and thank you very much.
Behind you, Marion.
Oh. Hi, good evening. My name is Allison Mendoza Walters, and I'm actually coming here from the field of public health. I work with local health departments and public health focused nonprofits. But I'm very interested in how to integrate planning professionals, transportation professionals, developers, and public health workers to help improve health and well-being. I learned a wealth of information from these presentations. I was very intrigued by the Nature RX program. And my question is, can you talk a little bit more how parks and planning may be working with public health or health-focused organizations? Because I did see so many shared goals with public health, improving physical, mental, and social health. I think I saw on one of the slides here.
Yeah, so the Department of Planning and the Department of Parks are actually part of a group of people called Healthy Montgomery. There's a website. The Healthy Montgomery committee is made up of the schools, transportation, various health providers like Kaiser and our health department. And we talk about health issues at the monthly meetings. But the latest push is to do something called Health in All Policies. Have you heard of that? Yeah, so we're just getting sort of indoctrinated into what that means, health in all policies. But it's a way for all the groups to talk about what some of their big challenges are in our programming so that we make each other aware of what's going on. And then hopefully this Health in All Policies initiative will spread the idea of health through all the different county departments.
And I think it's interesting how much planners really can influence the health aspects of where we live. I think about the fact that we're, constantly arguing that, and I think we're beginning to make some headway, that when we're planning neighborhoods, it's not about how fast can we get the cars through, it's what can we do to promote bicycling and walking. Because if you slow cars down enough, then it really does encourage people to try those other modes of getting from place to place. It's just little things like that where we recognize more and more the importance of integrating health into our planning. In the back.
Hello, I'm kind of new to all this, and I don't know if the right person is here for this question, but I work for a land development consulting firm, and I'm on board with all of what was presented today personally, and I'm trying to think of, knowing the kind of people I work with, how to incentivize. So what sparked my interest was the public right-of-ways in particular, and I'm thinking in my head, how can we incentivize that for a client? So I guess my question is, have you guys considered maybe making greater areas of right-of-way, making some kind of incentive for a developer? Has that idea at all crossed anyone's mind?
Well, with right-of-ways, we're working to use our right-of-ways more productively, you might say, which it has nothing to, developers, of course, want to use as much of their land as possible, and they don't like it when they come in with a development application and we tell them they're going to have to dedicate X number of feet for right-of-ways. But a lot of this is set in our master plans, but now, instead of increasing the number of lanes in some of those right-of-ways, we are, as I just said, looking at wider sidewalks and bikeways and actually trying to separate pedestrians from bikes, whereas before we had shared use paths. In terms of incentives, I don't know if someone from Parks can answer that. We now have in this county CR zoning, which is a commercial residential zone, which actually employs incentives zoning, in that you are given your base zoning is a very low FAR, floor area ratio, and if you want to get to your max, you need to provide, and you can choose from a menu, but you need to provide a variety of public benefits. And we've looked at the way that's structured now, and we have looked at possibly revising some of them to add greater incentives for some of the things you were talking about. So we're on the same wavelength, I would say. Are there any other questions? I want to thank you all for coming. I think it was a great session. I want to thank John Henderson for filling in for us at the very last moment. And I want to thank Rachel for an excellent presentation, just the historic look at how we've gotten to where we are today as well as where we're going in the future. I hope you will come next month. It will also be on March 21st. I say that because, of course, February and March fall on the exact same days. And we will be looking at how we zone for housing, not just moderately priced dwelling units, but actually how we provide housing for all of our residents. So it should be another very informative session. And have a good evening. Thank you.
Yeah.